Tonight, we will be sharing 4 stories, from a scary police officer story to a haunted corn maze, creatures in the woods, and more. This video will definitely hit on the chilling factor. I will also be joined by my good friend Bad Vibe Storytelling. He will be narrating stories 2 and 4, so if you aren't already subbed to him and you enjoy his narration, be sure to follow the link in the description. Also, I'm not going to tell you guys how to live your life, but you might want to have notifications on for this channel on Halloween night. I won't go into explaining why. Do it. A huge thank you to the writers for allowing us to share their stories. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. Please remember to drop a like if you enjoy, as it helps out the channel in a real way. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. If you've ever been to Australia, you know that it has a certain feel to it, as in, it borrows different lifestyle choices from either the United Kingdom and the United States, and it combines together. This can be reflected from the traditional homesteads mostly made from wood, to the railways, where the British-American combination is most noticeable. Another intriguing detail to this sunburnt land is the towns as well. You see, most of the towns are pretty old, the youngest townships in my area being from the late 1880s. I'm a police officer in a township like the ones I described. Now, I live in a town in the state of Queensland, near what is now known as the Sunshine Coast, an infamous seaside destination. The town I live in was founded in the 1840s, starting off as a small colonial settlement. The town started actually becoming a popular town in the mid-1860s, when every day, people and their families started coming in from the UK to start a new life. The town got a train station there in the 1880s, and now, almost 180 years on, this town, in short, has gone to shit slightly. I've seen shopkeepers come and go, and long-standing shops becoming derelict from decades of neglect, because of the shitty shopping centers opening up just miles away. The population in the 1980s was around 250,000, and now it's dropped to 90,000, which is a far cry from its happier days. Almost half of the population consists of people in their early 20s to late 90s. You ask me where today's generation is going? I'd rather hang out with the elderly at this point. This town is mostly famous for its stuck-in-the-past appearance. We have patrol stations that were built in the 1930s, and some houses dating as far back as the 1870s. The train station is still in use, but it only sees 3 trains a day going through it. Another interesting thing about this town is not necessarily the town itself, but what happens in it. The Aboriginal population in this town has been living here for generations, before the UK settled here. Throughout the town's history, the elders have always been uneasy about certain areas of land around the town, but they never explained why that was. But personally, I think the settlers got a clue as to why the indigenous were afraid on the 24th of November, 1877. You see, on that date, a small family, which consisted of a husband, wife, and their son, thought it'd be a good idea to have a picnic up in the forested hills surrounding the town. According to the locals that saw them going up into the ranges, the nickname for the collection of forested hills, at around 10 that morning. They were expected to come back around 4 that afternoon, when relatives would come around to visit them. Their relatives arrived at about 3:55 p.m., and they waited for 5 minutes, but as 4 came around, they hadn't come back. So they waited another hour, where somebody did come back. It was the husband. He came down from the ranges at about 5 estimated. The wife and their son was nowhere to be seen. According to the family's elderly relatives, there was something terribly wrong with the husband. He looked vacant. There was no other way to describe it, except that he was drained from all personality or feeling, like he was imitating a living, breathing person. Upon being asked where his wife and child went, he collapsed and died. I'm not joking. Official eyewitness reports said that the husband just collapsed and just died. The local coroner couldn't determine how he died. There was no signs of strain, blood clots, broken bones, or anything. He was perfectly healthy when he just died. I don't know how true that story is, but it has turned into a classical story to tell around the pubs and tables for everyone to hear. Strangely enough, the Ranges is now home to a national park stretching for miles, the longest nature walk being around 7.5 miles. Thanks to this nature walk, We, the police force, are always on guard. The ranges have always been, as I mentioned earlier, confusing. No kidding. You can easily get lost in that forest if you don't know what you're doing. We've had calls ranging from kids as young as 5 getting lost by wandering in without their parents, to even experienced hikers losing their way. Those calls are all fair and good, just everyday police work. But we do get calls that even manage to baffle us. The first call I went on, back in 1997, involved a 12-year-old who decided to wander into the ranges in defiance against his parents. He was last seen at around 5:30 p.m. God only knows why he wandered in that late, but 14 minutes later, at 5:44 p.m., his parents couldn't find him. Knowing their son, they determined he had wandered into the nature walk. We were called out at 5:50 p.m., and we arrived about 6 minutes later. We brought 2 search dogs to help us, one of the dogs being a 7-year-old German Shepherd named Bismarck, who was more or less an expert at finding lost people. He hadn't failed ever to find some clueless child or adult before. About 10 minutes later, 2 officers and I were instructed to take the 2 dogs into the ranges to find the lost kid. We departed immediately and started searching. We figured he hadn't gone far, so the initial range we figured to look was about 3 miles. We called for the kid multiple times in the initial search, and Bismarck and the other German Shepherd, whose name I can't recall, were on a pretty strong scent. Then, as we hit the 3-mile mark, the dogs stopped. That's what they did. They just stopped, and both looked into the same direction, further down the path. They were frozen, and you could tell they were staring at something. It was getting dark, so we shone our torches to see where they were looking, but there was nothing there. After about a minute of walking, they both hid behind us, tails hidden between their legs. No kidding. Our best search dogs, who showed no fear before, were bloody terrified now. It was getting dark, and with no sign of the kid, we headed back to the house. When we got back, we learned that the kid had come back to his parents. So, after all that, with us walking down a difficult path with complete uncertainty, with our best search dogs running scared, the kid finds his own way home. Of course, I didn't show hatred for the kid, as I wanted to keep my job. But here's the catch. The kid insists that he never left the property. He insists that he was in the backyard, in his sand pit, playing toy soldiers. In fact, the kid insists that it was his parents that went into the forest. He claims he saw them going into the forest with no clothes on. Now, of course, his parents think he's playing games, but he is overly insistent. The 2 other officers and I couldn't help but think that the kid was probably telling the truth. You see, I know kids. I started off as a babysitter in my mid to late teenage years, and if you've ever met kids, you know when they are lying or not. This kid's body language showed no signs of classic childhood lying. We eventually left, with all 4 of us left confused. It just didn't add up. Another call I went on was 5 years after my first call. An elderly couple in their mid-60s decided to go walking through the Ranges National Park. Once again, it was a missing persons call. I was assigned to this call, and so was the amateur that had been on the police force for 3 months. This kid, I tell you, was just extra baggage. He made out that his job was just like playing a damn video game, and it pissed me off at times. Anyway, we arrived at 12:32 at the entrance of the nature walk, and we went in. We were given directions by a park ranger as to where they were last seen. We walked down the path for about 6 whole miles. God knows how a 60-year-old couple made their way down that far, but I was about to call it a day with no signs of them. Then, the kid I brought along with me, who had continued up the path, called my name. "I found them, sir. They're here." "You did?" "Yes, sir." I jogged my way down to where the amateur officer was, and sure enough, there he was, aiding to the elderly woman, who had dislocated her shoulder joint, and she was in horrible pain. I looked around for the husband, but there was no sign of him. "Oi, kid, you said you found the both of them? Where's the husband?" "He's dead, like a box of rocks." My heart sank. The kid pointed out to me where the husband was, and sure enough, I found him. He had fallen on his head on a pile of rocks, only a few meters away from his wife. It was a horrible sight. I was pissed off, to be honest. This kid uses damn synonyms about how this woman's husband died, and he has the nerve to say it in front of her. and he says it in this little chirpy and loudmouthed voice, with no restraint or a hint of courtesy. I wanted to kill him right then and there, but I restrained the urge. I called in backup for an ambulance crew, and they came an hour and a half later. A week later, the elderly woman was questioned as to how they had gotten into their situation. It was hard for her to talk at first, but when she did, it only led to more questions. She claims that she and her husband decided to take a long way around for the day, for something to do. About half an hour in, they saw something on the top of a distant cliff face. It looked like a police officer. He had his back turned away from the cliff face, and he looked to be pacing up and down. According to the elderly woman, she said his walking was all wrong. His legs looked to be jogging, but he was only moving at a walking pace. They moved swiftly onward, but a few seconds later, they swore that they saw the same police officer right in front of them, running at them backwards. He ran straight past them, pushing the elderly couple off the path in different directions. That was the point when the elderly woman dislocated her shoulder. That was also when the elderly man also hit his head on the rocks. He died instantly. We never got to the bottom of that case, nor did we find this unusual backwards running, reality-defying culprit. It's not that we don't believe her, we do, or at least I did. Reports dating back 50 years have reported the same thing, but in different places. They see the same mysterious police officer running backwards. Some reports say that he was running on top of the trees, 15 feet off the ground, whilst others say that he runs straight up cliff faces. These reports aren't made up. They are real. Very real. Real people saw this thing in the ranges, in different times in the past, and made real police reports about it. That's what people forget sometimes. In this town, you got to keep an open mind. I once met an Aboriginal elder, in his late 50s, outside a pub near the town square. I met him 2 weeks after the elderly couple case, you see. I don't talk with a lot of people, since my father died in his late 90s. This Aboriginal fella sees that I'm sitting alone outside, with a hot beer in my hand. He decides to come over to me. "Hey mate," he says to me, interrupting my thoughts. "Hey," I reply. "Out here all alone, are you?" "I guess so, mate," I say, slightly getting annoyed. "The name's Ernest," he says, bringing his hand out for a handshake. I shake his hand, and he breaks into conversation with me. We talk for half an hour about his life, about mine. He tells stories about his wife and 4 kids that he loves dearly. I chuckle at a few of his stories, such as how he took his youngest child out fishing at a river, and how the kid almost passed out from all the excitement of catching a trout. It made my day, to be honest. "What do you do, mate?" he asks me finally. "Me? I'm a police officer," I slur. "Really? You've gone on any cases recently?" "About 2 weeks ago, yeah. It involved you've heard of the ranges." After my question, for the first time in our conversation, Ernest goes silent, and his face gets serious. He looks down at his beer and takes a swig from it. Ernest then looks back up at me for a few seconds in silence, and he speaks up again. "I have," Ernest said. "I refuse to go up there at times." "Why's that?" I ask. "There's stuff up in those forests. Nobody likes going up there. I don't know what made you white fellas build a trail up there, but for as long as I can remember, we've refused to disturb those hills." Ernest refused to talk about anything else about the ranges. I think it was best to leave it there anyway. Recently, I went on another call during my night shift. The police station radioed to me that somebody was running around the tree line, laughing hysterically on the south side of the town. I went to the site, and I parked my car at the far end of the street. I waited in my car for a minute to see if the suspect had fled the scene, but sure enough, 3 minutes later, I hear chuckling, which then breaks into an echoing howl of laughter. It was loud, despite the noise coming from the very end of the street. I got out of the car and made my way down. I didn't take the car so I wouldn't give my position away. As I was about to reach the end of the street, the laughing still continuing on into the night, I suddenly felt lightheaded. That was when, without any warning, I passed out. I woke in a hospital, where the police chief was talking to some nurse. That's when he noticed me looking up at him. "Ah, you're awake. You alright?" he asked. "I'd say so. What happened?" "Some passerby found you an hour ago, passed out on the street. What were you doing down there anyways?" the police chief asked. Investigating a call I got from the station, someone reported hysterical laughing. The police chief then gives me a look of confusion. There wasn't any report of hysterical laughing. In fact, last night was the quietest night for calls actually. I was confused. What do you mean? I'm pretty sure there wasn't anything, mate. Don't worry about it. With all due respect, there was. I said don't worry about it, the police chief snapped. Silence fell upon the room. Now, get some rest. You'll be fine. And so, I was left in my hospital room, to sit there and try to process what happened the night before. To this day, I'm not sure what happened there, nor do I know the origins of the amount of what the fuck that happens around here. I hope that one day I'll find answers. Okay, so as I'm writing this, I figured I should also mention one more thing that I've also found captivating on my search for answers as to what happens around here. 3 days ago, I was approached by Ernest at the same pub that I first met him in. So he comes up to me, and he says he wants to show me something. I ask what it was, and he says it's something in the ranges. I got visibly confused by this, because I'm pretty sure he said nobody in the Aboriginal communities liked going up there. Then Ernest explained to me that it wasn't him who would show me. Instead, it would be some other guy, who knew a lot about the activity in the ranges. Ernest had brought him along to the pub with him that day. He introduced me to the newcomer. Some older guy in his late 50s named Anthony Dalby. I said hello, and he immediately replied back. Anthony was an Irishman, whose great-great-parents moved to this town in 1864. Now, his family knew a lot about the surroundings. As for most of their lives, they'd go exploring in the ranges. Anthony reassured me that whatever questions I had, he'd be sure to answer them. Anthony and I planned to meet at the entrance to the national park at around 9 a.m. the next day. We made that official, and I arrived at the Ranges National Park at 8:46 a.m. Anthony arrived approximately 10 minutes later in his bummed-out Holden station wagon. "You sure you're ready to go in?" Anthony asked. I replied yeah, and we both started walking into the scrub. We walked for maybe 2 miles on the main trail, until we stopped. Anthony then looked to the right of the path, where there was a rather steep hill. "Gotta climb up here. You sure you'll be able to make it?" he said, fixing himself up for the climb. I replied yes once again. We started the steep ascent once again, moving further and further away from the trail, which did make me a little nervous. Nonetheless, we arrived at the destination about 15 minutes later. "Here we are then," Anthony announced, looking at something amongst the brush. Sure enough, I saw what he was looking at. Beyond the thick tree line was a clearing, where trees had been notably cut down. There were 3 buildings, which were definitely over 100 years old, which were all in rather good condition. Those are colliery houses. That one on the far left was for the foreman, that one in the middle was for storage, and that one on the far right was the generator house. Anthony lectured to me. "There is something just over there that is also connected to this place." He then gestured to the right of me. What he was gesturing at was a small embankment in the terrain. Dug into that small embankment were 3 mine shafts, all 3 in different states of decay. The best preserved one being the shaft in the middle. The other 2 had been boarded up, but the middle shaft, strangely enough, had its barricade removed. To be completely honest, I was amazed. I never knew beforehand that there were any mines still standing, especially one as preserved as this one. Everything seemed to be stuck in time. All 3 buildings had almost everything intact, except for some shattered windows, rotted doors, and parts of the roof caved in. There's a story that surrounds this place, dating back to the 1890s, Anthony informed me, as he sipped on his beer. "What's the story then?" I asked, and this is what he told me. In 1896, 60 miners were present at this very colliery one day, as per usual. Now this colliery had a system where the miners would be assigned to these 3 mine shafts equally, to improve efficiency. There were 5 miners in particular that were present. We're still not certain of the names of these 2, but some sources say that 2 names were Sean and Bill. At around 5 that afternoon, 55 miners left the premises. That was except for 5 miners that were assigned to the tunnels in the middle shaft. 3 miners volunteered to go look for them. After 2 hours, there was no news, and the 3 volunteers hadn't returned. The police force went looking for them later that afternoon. Eventually, they did find something. On the very far end of the tunnels, almost 25 feet underground, clothes were found. They were fairly new except for the dust from the rock that had settled upon it. It turns out that the clothes belonged to one of the miners, but he was never found. Even to this day, the search is still open and has never been closed. After he finished, I was staring at the entrance to the middle shaft. The already eerie feeling just got worse. I was jumped out of my observant, awestruck stance when Anthony spoke up once again. Well, it's only a story, he insisted. Anyways, I'm heading back to town. You coming, or do you fancy camping out here? Without saying anything, I swiftly made my way back home, Anthony following slowly behind. To be honest, I panicked. Don't know why I panicked, or what caused me to panic, but something put me in that state. You know when you hang around a certain place where you feel like you're not supposed to be there? That's how I felt. I've got a compelling feeling that I need to investigate it. It's possible that whatever is down there, it will give me the answers that I need. There's something down in those shafts that shouldn't be there.
I love Halloween. I look forward to it each year with great enthusiasm and excitement. The weather turns crisp and the leaves start to change, and the holiday buzz begins to vibrate once more. It's a catalyst, a kickstarter for the final stretch of another year. Nature slowly exhales color in the gorgeous flourish of red, orange, and yellow as the days begin to shorten. Summer clothes are put away and the apple cider makes its comeback. Unfortunately, I'm the only one in my friend group that enjoys the darker side of Halloween. I'm talking about the scary aspect, horror movies, haunted houses, and ghost tours. My friends like the concept and the theme that hangs over this time of the year, but when it comes to actually participating in these events, well, they are usually nowhere to be found. Each year I tolerate their cowardice and typically end up joining the group in whatever activity they decide upon. But this year I wanted more. This year I finally decided to go out on my own and really embrace the scary side of Halloween. I pleaded, begged a couple of my friends to join me in this endeavor, but they backed out apologetically, claiming they weren't interested, and so I set out alone. I scoured the internet and local papers, searching for something that would please my horror hunger pains. I didn't want some dumbed down haunted house filled with giggling and screaming children. I also didn't want to do anything that was too crowded. After much fruitless searching, I saw an advertisement for something called Corn Maze 43. There is very little information about it, and when I checked out the address, I saw that it was in a very rural part of the state. It promised scares unlike you'd ever seen before. With such confidence boasting, I decided to give it a try. I checked the calendar and decided I was going to go on Halloween night. If it bored me, I could always join my friends somewhere and engage in whatever lame activity they were doing. I didn't particularly care that I was going alone, but some company to share the experience with would have been nice. In any case, once Halloween night rolled around, I was tingling with excitement. That night, around 8, I hopped in my car and headed for the attraction. The countryside blurred past my windows, illuminated by the full moon. I rolled down my window and let the cold air in. After about an hour, I checked my GPS again and saw that I was getting close. The road continued to twist and wind through uninhabited country, a rolling, silent expanse of grass, rolling hills, and peaceful serenity. As I got closer, now only half a mile away, I wondered if I was going the right way. I didn't see any signs of life, nor signs for the corn maze. Just as I was about to give up, utterly disappointed, I saw a single wooden post hammered into the earth along the roadside. Written vertically along it in black paint were the words, Corn Maze 43, with an arrow pointing down the dirt road that I had almost missed. Rejuvenated, I turned the wheel and began to bump down the narrow road. Gravel crunched beneath the tires. As I left a trail of dust in my wake, I scanned my surroundings and realized I was entering a massive cornfield. The stalks rose high around me, and the road continued to snake erratically through the rows of the still farmland. I rounded a bend and hit my brakes, heart leaping into my throat. My headlights illuminated the end of the road directly in front of me. A wall of corn boxed my car in from all sides, and I saw I was not the only visitor tonight. Another car parked in front of me, unmoving and dark. Where was everyone though? I at least expected some sort of attraction center or booth, but there was none in sight. I turned my car off and got out, slightly confused. My boots crunched over the gravel as I wandered over to the car parked in front of mine. I glanced inside and saw it was empty. I scratched my head and gnawed at my lip. I scanned the walls of corn around me and something caught my attention. It was a divide, a narrow rectangular of darkness that led into the field. Impaled in the earth next to the entrance was another wooden post that read Maze 43. If another car hadn't been there, I would have gone home. This seemed like an old attraction, some relic of previous years, but since I knew I wasn't alone, I decided to go check it out. If I entered the maze and I realized my assumptions were correct, I would just leave. I went back to my car to retrieve a flashlight. Clicking it on, I swung the beam back to the entrance and almost suffered a heart attack. Standing directly in front of the maze was a person clothed in a red cloak. A hood was pulled low over their face, and jutting from the oval of darkness was a long, black beak. I placed my hand over my chest and slowed my racing heart. It was a man wearing a mask. The attraction manager. It had to be. "Hello?" I raised my hand to him. The man didn't move. "I saw your ad," I continued, staring at the odd bird masked man. "Is this the right place for the haunted corn maze?" After a moment, the masked man stepped to the side and pointed a red gloved hand at the entrance. His robe fluttered in the wind, and he remained silent. I saw dark plastic eyes glittering out at me from the shadow of his hood, a crow's mask. "Do I need to pay anything?" I asked. The man pointed down the long, open throat of corn. "Okay, I'm going in," I said, making my way towards it. I kept the light beam off of him, but as I passed the man, I couldn't help but look at his face. The long beak and beady plastic eyes stared back. With the man behind me, I entered the maze. The walls of corn rose over my head and shifted in the wind. It sounded like dozens of people were sprinting past me, mere feet away, unseen. I felt the first of the excited fear, but knew it only stemmed from the total isolation I was encased in. I continued my trek, twisting and winding through the maze, passing intersections and bends, turning abrupt corners, and choosing new pathways. As I walked, I kept expecting someone to jump out and scare me, but nothing did. In fact, I hadn't stumbled across anything remotely frightening. After about 35 minutes, I was ready to leave. Frustrated, I turned around, determined to piece together from memory the path back to my car. As I turned, I noticed something off the beaten path inside the cornfield. I squinted and shined my light on it. It was a double-door vault, like a weathered bulkhead. Painted across the rusty doors were the words, Corn Maze 44. Intrigued, I left the path and pushed through the corn towards it. What was this all about? Was this part of the attraction? It had to be, but why was it so hidden? It didn't make much sense, but I was so desperate to discover something exciting, so I decided to inspect it. I tried the handle and found it opened easily. I shined a light down into the gasping mouth of darkness before me. Concrete stairs descended to an equally unimpressive hallway composed of the same plain-faced concrete. I thought for a second, then shrugged. Screw it, let's see what this is all about. If nothing else, I might have a good story to tell my friends. I crept down the stairs, shining my flashlight ahead of me. The air smelled moldy and stale, like no one had been down here in years. I reached the bottom of the stairs and my light was swallowed up by the long expanse of the hallway. I started to walk, my boots echoed off the walls, and everything suddenly was very quiet. I kept walking. There was no branching passageways or alternate routes, just one continuous tongue of barren concrete stretching out before me. After about 10 minutes of walking, I started to think that it was a waste of time. Seconds before turning back, a repeating instinct tonight. My light caught another door. It was at the top of another small flight of stairs, leading back to the surface. Curiously, I ascended. I placed my hand on the cold iron and pushed. With a great creaking groan, the door opened. I blinked as light flooded inside, a dim, gloomy wash of dull color. I clicked my light off and stepped out to the other side. I looked onto the world, and my breath was robbed from my lungs. I felt a deep charge erupt in my stomach, and my senses were overwhelmed with the impossible. Endless cornfields stretched as far as the eye could see, disappearing in the overcast horizon. Jolting from the earth, littering the cornfields, were enormous structures of pure black. They rose up like faceless skyscrapers, windowless and perfect in their slick design. They were rectangular and appeared to be made from some unknown rock. They towered over the fields, their summits nothing more than a blank, flat surface. Perched atop the dozen looming formations were hundreds of motionless birds, but they were huge, easily 6 or 7 feet in length. Their long beaks and folded wings were the color of midnight. Their bodies were sickly thin. I traced the birds across the sky, catching a few in mid-flight. They were flocking towards the great structures from the cornfields. I felt my stomach turn as my eyes settled on the expanse of swaying stalks. Littering the earth were endless wood crosses, erect without order. Nailed to the crosses were men and women, bloodied and in agony. With terrifying realization, I saw that each person had a pumpkin shoved over their head, completely encasing it. They looked like crucified scarecrows, alive and squirming in torment. But it didn't end there. Impregnated in each one of the pumpkin was some kind of hose. I could see orange fluid pulsing through it, a continuous flow. I traced the hoses up to their origin and felt my blood turn to ice. Hanging in the sky was an absolutely titanic human body. It was upside down and naked, its male sexuality shockingly visible. It was wrapped in thick chains, the iron crisscrossing over the enormous being's chest. Binding its ankles was a second coil of chain. I craned my head back, mouth agape, and traced the endless link to the cloud-filled sky, where it disappeared. Whatever this nightmare hung from, I couldn't see it, the overcast heavens obscuring the source. The hanging giant was unmoving, its colossus body a living statue of human flesh. I ran my eyes along the lengths of its upside-down body and felt my knees tremble as I gazed upon its head. A fat orange thing wedged itself on top of the man's shoulders. Protruding from the rigid exterior were countless hoses, snaking, swaying, descending from the thing in the sky. Each hose ended at the crucified humans, the tubing rammed into the pumpkin-headed people, pumping them full of that foul orange fluid. I saw all of this in an instant. A freight train of horrified amazement that slammed into my eyes with the full force of a locomotive. I stepped back, swinging my gaze from the upside-down giant in the sky to the crucified humans in the fields, and then over towards the towering black constructs that held the mass of birds. All sense of reason and logic was eradicated in an instant. A sledgehammer obliterating the fragile glass orb that had once been my mind. I fell to my knees, unable to hold myself up. Everything I had ever understood rushed out of me in a bluster of disbelief and crippling impossibility. And that's when I felt something grab the back of my neck. I tried to scream, but the pain was too great for such a natural escape. I was lifted off my feet and turned around to face my captor. I recoiled as I gazed on the thing that held me. It was an ogre-like creature, a pale, gnarled thing with meaty hands that gripped me like a vice. It was easily 3 times as tall as me, and its drooling, crooked mouth leered down at me. Rising from its back was a net filled with a mountain of pumpkins, of all shapes and sizes. Their weight was so great that it forced the creature to bend over, pressing down towards the earth. Again, I tried to scream, its bulbous, slightly pink eyes staring down at me. I raised my hands and tried to pry his fingers from my throat, but it was useless. The ogre gurgled something and then began to walk, taking me with it. We were going into the cornfields. I was held clumsily at its side, my body smacking indifferently against its legs. I struggled to squeeze air down my throat. Each breath was a battle. I blinked back tears of pain and turned to see where the monster was taking me. As I did, I saw a flock of new birds rise from the fields. They cawed loudly, their great wings taking them high up into the sky. I saw them climb up to the heavens and soar towards the great faceless constructs of the black rock that jutted from the land like rotten teeth. When the murder of crows landed on top of one such surface, I noticed something I hadn't before. The protruding mass of rock sank ever so slightly back into the earth, and as it did, a great clinking rattle shook the sky. My eyes tore over to the hanging giant. It had descended by a fraction, bringing it closer towards the earth. And that's when pieces began to click in my mind. Fractured formations slowly taking shape in a form of grim understanding. Whatever this horrible place was, wherever it sat in the multitude of unknown nightmares, these birds were trying to free this titan in the sky. The jutting black rocks were some sort of counterweight to what the giant's chains were bound to. With each new flock of massive birds, the structure sank, bringing the chained monster in the sky closer to earth. But the birds, where did they come from? As this question shuddered through my mind, my captor reached the fields of endless crucifix. The wooden crosses rose around us as I stared at them with my bloodshot eyes. Now that I was closer, a new realization ripped through me like a bolt of lightning. The humans upon the crosses were changing. Pumpkins encasing their faces continued to fill with orange fluid that pumped down from the giant in the sky, and as they did so, I could see physical mutation beginning to blossom. With disgusted horror, I saw beaks protruding from the pumpkins, each at varying stages of growth. They jutted through the orange flesh, covered with neon ooze. As we continued to pass the crucified, I saw something I would never forget. A cluster of 3 crosses stood in a semicircle, and as we approached, the skin of the hanged people exploded with shocking violence. Emerging from the ruined remains were massive crows, unfurling and expanding to their full height. They screeched loudly and flapped their wings for the first time, taking flight and rising towards the great rock structures. Before I had time to process this new display of unsettling horror, the ogre was spinning me around, the world a blur of dull gray and green. The grip around my throat was temporarily removed, and I gasped, but only had time for a single breath before I was clutched around the waist. I was being raised. The creature pinned me against something, stretching me out above its head. My back slammed onto something, and I felt splinters of wood claw into my shirt. No. Oh, please no. The dawning horror of what was about to happen, I released a shriek of throat-tearing fear and pleading desperation. This monster was going to crucify me. I struggled frantically as the ogre held me up against the cross, splaying my arms with its massive, prodding fingers. Tears poured from my eyes as I watched it reach down and retrieve an enormous nail from a pouch on its waist. With the precision of a surgeon, the ogre drove it through my arm at the wrist. It happened in the blink of an eye, the beast mauling me with horrifying quickness. The pain was immediate and terrible. A rod of fire pinning me to the wooden crossbeam. Blood erupted from the punctured flesh and dripped lazily down my arm, soaking my clothes. Before I had time to recover, the ogre slammed another nail into my other arm. A cry shattered my vocal cord, and the world shook as my vision blurred, tears running down my face. Gasping, sobbing, I watched helplessly as this monster reached behind itself and retrieved a pumpkin from the colossal heap on its back. Through gritted teeth, I begged uselessly, watching as it raised its arms and prepared to bring it down over my head. But something stopped it. A sound soaring across the sky. Someone was screaming. A woman. I blinked away a tear and stared past the ogre. From his height, I gained a new perspective of the cornfield. Littering the land was a dozen of bulkheads, some closed, most open. Wandering out of them were dazed, confused people, sharing the same horrified wonder I had felt. The woman who was screaming stood a couple 100 yards away, watching as my captor nailed me to the cross. The ogres, one of many I now saw, all with mountains of pumpkins on their backs, turned to the woman. She took a step back, shrieking. Deciding that it could finish me later, it lumbered towards her, gritting through its mouthful of fragmented teeth. I turned away. Pain ran through me like currents of electricity. My pierced flesh boiled with constant pain. I looked at the nail driven through my skin and felt as if they would tear away, taking chunks with it. I needed to escape before the ogres came back to finish the job. It was hard to concentrate, hard to think through the wall of pain that slammed into my senses with every beat of my heart. I rolled my head back against the wood, trying to steady my shuddering chest. I stared out at the field of crosses, my eyes bloodshot and moist, and then I squinted, the pain vanishing for a moment as I spotted something. It was a massive singular plate of iron, 100 yards in diameter. It rested on the surface of the earth, some sort of enormous vault or gate, and hinges the size of houses. It looked like a manhole, but the biggest one I've ever seen. Etched in black across the surface were 2 words, Christmas Land. It was nonsense to me, but something told me that whatever was happening here had something to do with that great covered hole. Get out, stop wasting time, and get out of this place, I thought, the pain returning in waves of furious violence. I looked at my impaled flesh one more time and prepared myself for the inevitable pain. I shut my eyes and gritted my teeth so hard that I could hear my jaw pop, and then I began to pull myself off the cross. A gory, bloody act of desperation and survival. I screamed until I tasted blood. I arched my back and pushed away from the cross with my feet, pulling my arms out and over the nails. With sickening fear, I felt myself pull free and plunge to the earth. I smacked onto the dirt and stars exploded in my head. I gasped, scrambling to my feet, fighting off a threatening blackout. I looked at my mangled wrist and winced and gagged. I tore my shirt into strips and bound my wounds as tightly as I could, stemming the flow of blood. And then I ran. I ran as hard and as fast as I had ever. Cornstalks whipping at my face as I plunged through them, tongues of heat licking my cheeks. I didn't slow. I didn't falter. I didn't wince. Hell was on my heels, and I know I didn't have long before it caught up. I snaked through the corn, heading back towards the bulkhead I emerged from, breath hissing from my lungs like gusts of hot steam. My head thundered, and I felt an inferno pulse through me with every heartbeat. I tripped, caught myself, and plunged forward. I could hear the great screech of the crows coming from the cornfields, a deafening cry louder than I've ever heard before. I chanced a glance over my shoulder and saw the sky go dark as a flock rose from the crosses. There had to be thousands of them, a mass of ungodly creations birthed from the bodies of the taken. They ascended as one and disappeared, settling on top of the gray stone towers. Still running, I saw them sink into the earth, and then the rattle of chains followed, an echo of massive iron. The Titan in the sky plunged to the earth, the counterweight releasing the final distance. The earth shook as I collapsed into the field, a rolling explosion of incredible power. The chains flew from its body like an eruption of shrapnel as I heard shards whistle overhead like cannonballs. As the monstrous giant made contact with the ground, the mammoth pumpkin around its head shattered, casting a hurricane of wet orange across the land. I stood up, knees trembling. The colossus being stood as well, a towering creature of massive proportions. Rising from its shoulders, previously hidden by the pumpkin, was the head of a crow. Its beak was like a scythe, a massive, dangerous thing that protruded from its black feathered face and two globe-like eyes. In elation, it raised its head to the heavens and screamed, a piercing, skull-splitting cry. The birds on the great stone structures echoed their god's call and took flight. Swarming down from the heights, they swirled around the thundering giant like a storm cloud, cawing and calling to their master. I tore my eyes from the terrifying spectacle and pressed on, new fear giving me the strength I needed to reach my destination. I felt the crow-headed giant lumbering behind me, its legs like pillars of quaking concrete that rattled the earth. Finally, desperately, mercifully, I found the bulkhead that I had first emerged from. The door stood open, inviting me back down into the long, dark hallway. Crying tears of relief, I took one last look over my shoulder. The Titan, along with its swarming congregation, was ripping open the immense hatch, the one that read Christmasland. With a roar of fury, it flung the iron cover away, tearing it from its hinges and flinging it like it was weightless. The crow god stared down into the gaping hole and let out a cry of rage and anger, so fierce I felt my bladder release. The great Titan got down on its knees and slithered inside, roaring so loud I felt pain split my skull. The flock of birds rallied around their master and dove down into the hole, screaming and cawing as if lost in madness, as if they were going to war. I turned away, heart thundering, and sprinted down to the darkness of the bulkhead. My breath ripped past my lips as I bolted down the dark hallway, begging my body to stay conscious and in motion. Faintly, I spotted moonlight on the other end, dripping down from the dark sky to splash across concrete steps. I reached them and tore up them, exploding out into the familiar night. I didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't hesitate. My boots churned the earth as I fled back through the corn, back to my car, away from my nightmare called Corn Maze 44. I didn't have time to reflect on my horrifying experience until after I received medical attention from the hospital. I laid on a gurney, my arms stitched and bandaged. I lost a lot of blood, but somehow I managed to stay conscious until I came speeding into the nearest emergency room. My terrors I had seen clung to my mind like burning claws. They gripped my memory like an unflinching horror. What had that place been? Where had it been? What world had I stumbled on? Where had the crow god gone? And what was Christmasland? I didn't have answers to these questions, and I knew I never would. If I spoke to others about my experience, I wouldn't be long for a madhouse. I wouldn't blame them. What I saw was impossible and held no place in reality. The only reason I, myself, haven't descended into total insanity is because of the last thing I saw before reaching my car. The only thing that assured me that I hadn't been hallucinating some horrific world. Something that made it real. It was the man in the plastic mask, clothed in red. Because, you see, he was no longer man. He was one of those crows. And as I plunged through the last of the corn maze and stumbled to my car, I saw him, shred its robes away and spread its wings. But it didn't take flight into the starry sky. Instead, it burrowed into the earth, down to find its master in the tunnels of reality that ran unseen beneath the world.
About a year ago, I went on a trip up north to go camping. I needed a break from everyday life and some me time. Now the woods weren't small or a popular camping spot, and I was full on prepared to rough it. All I brought with me were necessary provisions. My tent, a set of matches, a lighter, my Swiss Army knife, a flashlight, and a few other knickknacks that were meant to last me the weekend. I set up camp, not far off from a stream that led up to the main highway, and decided to go take a look around the woods, get a sense of the wildlife and all. Around an hour or so later, I came across this cave that kind of dipped into the ground. I decided to take out my flashlight and shine a light into the cave. After doing that, I noticed that after the cave dipped down, it seemed to form some sort of passageway. There also seemed to be marks that resembled scratches on the walls, from where I was looking down, so I thought maybe some animal lives in it. A bear, maybe. I stupidly decided to take a look inside as I crouched down into the cave and started walking, semi-crouching for a bit, inside it until the walls seemed to have gotten more apart, thus giving me more room for movement. The cave was pretty dark, aside from the light of my flashlight. I walked in the cave for no more than 5 to 10 minutes. Lost track of time for a bit, so it's an estimate, when I started hearing scurrying. At that point, I was kind of too scared to keep going, so I turned around and headed back in the direction I came. As soon as I began climbing out, I shit you not, I heard something running behind me. Not natural running either. Whatever it was running on all fours. Too light to be a bear, but too heavy to be anything smaller than a wolf. But the scraping sounds it made while running did not resemble a wolf at all. At that point, I booked it out and ran straight for my campsite. Aside from the rest of the forest, my camp was in a well enough lit area, and just shy of the wooded area, near the stream, as I mentioned before. Just as I left the wooded area, the running seemed to stop. Too paranoid, I kept an eye on the woods. I didn't see anything definitive, but from the corner of my eye, I saw what resembled a humanoid figure standing around 6 to 7 feet tall. Thin and somewhat hairless. I don't know how to describe it. But as I blinked, it was gone. I then decided to grab my stuff and head to my car, which I had parked near my campsite, and drove back onto the main highway via a road that cut through the woods, still following the river. But I was still terrified, especially when it felt as if my bumper had hit something when I made one of the turns onto the highway, but at the time, I had brushed it off as my nerves. After I had made the long drive home, I decided to settle down and take a moment to collect myself. When it was time for bed, I was too scared to sleep, but eventually drifted off. At least until the creaking. Ever since that day for the next month, at night I've been hearing creaking noises. The sound of steps or movement. The worst is the sound of scratching across my walls, as if something was dragging its nails on them. I don't know what to do. Whatever came back with me didn't want to kill me. No, it seems like it was toying with me, savoring me. I was terrified. Terrified that one day, it'll have had enough of playing with me. Within that month, I also received the unfortunate news that my mother had passed and actually left the house to me. Despite how sad it made me, I will admit a part of me was relieved. I put my house up on the market and went back to my childhood home. From my contact with the agent in charge of the old house, I know it's been sold by now. It's been a few months and no sign of the thing, until last night. I heard the scraping coming from downstairs. I was so scared I couldn't sleep. Help me. I don't know what to do.
As a kid, I lived with neglectful parents at best. At worst, Dad would turn his screams and fists on me, but I've learned quickly how to dodge the worst of it. Mom wasn't much help. She'd just smoke in the kitchen and bitch at him for staying out so late. At the time, we basically lived in the middle of nowhere. Our nearest neighbor were a long walk away for a 6-year-old, and we had trees between us. No one to run to for help. But I was a pretty small kid at my age. I learned that I could fit pretty much anywhere. The closet, dryer. I think even once I tucked myself under the futon in such a way I could still get some air, but no one could see me. I was a master at hiding, but not for a good reason. One night I chose to do something different. I could hear it in my dad's yells. He was pissed and was about to get violent. Mom wasn't helping either, just piling fuel onto the inferno of a flame. I knew I had to find a good hiding spot. I had gotten an idea a few days before when I realized that the lattice covering the bottom half of our porch had a hole in it. Not big enough to fit a full-grown man, most likely, but I could fit my skinny 6-year-old in there no problem. So wrapping myself in my blanket and grabbing my hippo stuffy, I snuck out the window and ran into the backyard. In the middle of autumn, when it was 40 degrees out and temperatures were steadily dropping. I crawled under the porch, scraping my elbow and getting splinters in my palms, but I fit inside. It was actually quite spacious compared to most of my hiding spots. I couldn't sit up all the way, but I had plenty of room to spread out my limbs. Of course, I was getting covered in dirt. It had rained a few days ago, so the mud was still a little wet. I wrapped myself in my blankie the best I could and settled in for the night. But soon, even with my blankie and my hippo, my teeth were chattering so hard and I could barely breathe. I didn't want to go back inside, knowing that if my dad caught me, I'd be in for the whipping of my life. So I just toughed it out. "Honey, are you cold?" The voice was not the voice of my mother, scratchy from all the smoking and screeching she did. It was sweet, like honey. I turned over to see a dim outline of a woman lying on her stomach next to me. She had a pretty butterfly necklace and was dirty like I was. I nodded, not wondering how she'd been down there without me noticing. The woman belly crawled forward and wrapped her arms around me, and I suddenly became warm, like I was sitting next to a campfire. I snuggled in her arms, not minding the mud. After all, we were both dirty. "You've gotten so big," the woman said, examining my face. "How old are you now, Alex?" 6. How did I know this woman again? I didn't think I did. 6? The woman gasped. "You're all grown up then. I'm so happy." She sighed pleasantly and stroked my hair. I had never felt so cozy in my life. "What's your name?" I asked. She smiled. I could hear it in her voice. "I'm Lily. What's your favorite things to do?" I had to think for a second. "I like board games and coloring." Lily chuckled. "Just like me then. Could never get enough of Scrabble. But I guess you're still young to play that, huh?" I nodded. "I want to play it though. I like the tiles. Would you play with me?" I heard Lily sharply inhale. I don't think I can. Your daddy put me under here, and I can't leave, but..." She thought for a second. "Alex, could you do me a favor?" "Of course." This lady was so nice, why wouldn't I do her a favor? "When you wake up in the morning, go to the police station. Ask for the officer named Lowell Joyce. Tell him where you can find Lily, okay? Underneath your back porch. He will come and get me, okay? And then maybe we can play Scrabble." Yippee! I was too excited at the possibility of playing Scrabble to notice how Lily's voice caught at the end. I nodded vigorously. "I'll do it. We can be on the same team, right?" Lily softly laughed. "I'll help you understand the rules. Good night, Alex." When I woke up the next morning, I heard Lily's voice. "Go now. Your dad's gone at work. I'll tell you how to get to the station." Rubbing my eyes, I crawled out from underneath the porch and went to my house to grab my shoes and coat. I shivered in the frosty cold, but I thought Lily was right behind me. After my shoes and coat were on, I started walking. It was long enough to get to the neighbor's house. I can't remember how long it took to get to the police station. Although I have no idea why no one pulled over to see what the hell a 6-year-old in his dirty pajamas was doing walking alongside the road. But Lily kept guiding me onward. Wait. Okay, cross the street now. Turn right here. Keep going, you've almost made it. I nearly collapsed with exhaustion by the time I walked into the station. The guys were in the front chatting and having a good time and didn't see me until I was almost at the front desk. Whoa, kid. You okay? One of the officers knelt down to my level, eyes wide. I nodded. I'm okay. Can I speak to Lil Joyce? One of the officers picked me up. Sure, kid. Sure. Let's go get you someplace warm. Holy shit, your lips are blue. I remember quietly scolding the man to watch his language. Shit was a bad word. I was given some warm cocoa and wrapped up in a blanket by the time the old man with a graying mustache sat by me. Hey kid, I'm Sheriff Joyce. What's your name? Alex. I sat down my cup and looked him straight in the eye. I was told to tell you that Lily is under my back porch. You need to go and let her out so she can play Scrabble. I had never seen a grown man turn pale before. Lots of things blurred together at that point. I remember being taken back to my house, and there were a lot of police cars and people around. The back porch was surrounded by yellow tape, and someone was taking a black bag away while my dad was in handcuffs. After that, I lived with my grandparents, which were Sheriff Joyce and his wife. I tried to ask him what happened and who Lily was, but I always got shut down. I was too young to know. But life got better, a lot better. Grandpa was the best man I could have hoped for in my life. We went out on weekends, to the movies, where he let me have a giant soda, even though I had to pee in the middle of the movie. When I asked him if I could drink when I was 13, he let me try beer. I spat it out, and didn't touch it again. He never judged me for my love of art, letting me paint my whole bedroom multiple times over the years. I felt safe around him. He never laid a hand on me. My grandmother was amazing too. Over the week she would homeschool me, along with teaching me things that you wouldn't learn in school, such as how to respect others and not to take their crap. And cooking, lots of cooking. I could make my own birthday cake by the time I was 12, but I usually made them for my friends. I had a lot of those after I was free from my dad. When I turned 16, Grandpa took me back to my dad's house. The whole thing had been bulldozed over, but I could still see some yellow tape wound around a few of the trees, faded and torn. We sat on the back of his truck. He had opened a beer and drank half of it before setting it down and grabbing me an orange soda. After I drank it, he told me, Lily was your mother. Good thing you didn't tell me when I was drinking. I would have had it coming out of my nose. My mom? I questioned, confused. Your actual mom. The woman that you lived with your dad was not your mother. My granddad grabbed another beer. Lily was my daughter. I loved her so much. But when you were around 6 months old, she vanished. My stomach dropped. My dad just imprisoned her under the porch? I asked, starting to feel sick. Grandpa took another deep breath before setting the unopened beer down. That's something I'll never be able to understand. Lily told you to find me and that she loved Scrabble? Yeah. She kept me warm that night. I would have probably frozen to death if she hadn't been there. I was a stupid kid, even I knew that. Grandpa went dead quiet before he opened the beer and slammed the whole thing. Alex, Lily had been dead the whole time she was gone. When we dug her up, she was bones. Experts confirmed it, and your dad confessed what happened. They had gotten into a fight and he threw her down the stairs, and she broke her neck. He clenched his fist. I knew he had something to do with her disappearance, but I never had proof until you walked into my station, covered in dirt, telling me that she was under your porch. I was floored. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was shake my head. But I saw her. She was alive. She had a butterfly necklace. I trailed off, and Grandpa pulled out the evidence baggie from his pocket. There was a butterfly necklace, all right, rusty and parts of the paint chipped off. But I remembered it clearly, as I remembered Lily's voice. Grandpa took a shaky breath as he pressed the bag into my hands. Lily loved you so much. It's why she stuck around with that bastard. You were her whole world. She was constantly taking pictures of you and sending them to us in the mail. Sometimes a mother's love can accomplish things that no humans can do. My eyes overflowed with tears as I clutched the necklace to my chest, choking on sobs. I leaned against my grandpa. He held me tight, and I swear I felt a few of his tears hit the top of my head. And just for a brief moment, I swear I felt the warm love I felt that night under the porch.